this is Rick Kaselj from exercisesforinjuries.com. I'm here with another interview for you. And in this interview, we're going to talk about the 10 commandments of ruthless mobility. And I've got Dean Somerset, who's going to go through the 10 commandments of ruthless mobility. So first, Dean, I'll get you to introduce yourself for the people that don't know who you are, and we'll roll into the 10 commandments.
I wish I could match your energy in the morning, but I've only had one cup of coffee today.
And you're an hour ahead of me.
I am, but it's Saturday. I got to sleep in a little bit. I only woke up at 8, so that's always good.
We had the kids. The kids woke us up at 6, and they want to do like WrestleMania in the bed. And, yeah, so I'm awake.
And they have feet that have homing guided missiles for certain body parts, right?
Oh yeah, when it's wrestling time, the glasses come off. You know, yeah. Anything valuable comes off because
and they'll step on parts of you that shouldn't be stepped on.
It's always they just don't have control of their arms. And next thing you know, poof. If there's a face shot, it's like, okay, over, fighting's on, wrestling's over.
Yeah, somebody's crying, and usually it's not the ones that should be crying.
Dad's crying, so it's over. Mom comes in, who hit Dad? Okay, so Dean, I'll get you to introduce yourself.
Back on topic now.
Yeah, back on topic.
I'm Dean Somerset. I'm a trainer from Edmonton, Alberta. I have a beard, as you can see. I work with a lot of people that have injuries, medical conditions, people that are just general fitness, some elite athletes, guys that have gone to the Olympics and won gold medals, some pro hockey teams. A lot of variety as far as the clientele that I work with, but the majority of people that I work with just try to move better, either get stronger or be able to have better control over range of motion. So in any situation, I try to follow basic rules of anatomy, physiology, and some of those are the ones we're going to talk about today. How to get people ruthlessly mobile with minimal impact on how they're able to feel with them in terms of pain, dysfunction, and just being able to be beasts in the gym.
And then also, like you said, just move better, and move better ends up applying just to like the regular person. Like, who doesn't want to move better? Because if you move better, you feel better, you have less aches and pains, you can end up doing stuff. But if you can move better in the gym and in performance ways, you can do better. So it applies to, you know, everyone when it comes to moving better and improving your mobility.
Exactly. And a lot of the hockey players that I've worked with have very similar movement patterns to office workers. They can't really get their arms overhead. They've got some spinal issues. They got hip mobility issues. I mean, you figure if a guy's stuck with his stick on the ice all the time and in solid form skates, ankle mobility is gone, T-spine mobility is gone, overhead motion's gone. Plus in hockey, they get checked on the boards all the time, so they wind up with like bilateral AC separations. That's going to affect their mobility. So how do we actually get them to remain mobile so that they can lift their kids up and do WrestleMania once they've retired?
Yeah. Okay. So then let's start off with the first commandment.
All right. So the biggest one that I find is that before we worry about how a person stretches or what kind of stretching routine a person should use or whether or not they should get mobile or not, biggest one is structure. That's what's going to determine your range of motion. So in terms of structure, there's different ways that joints and bones can align. You've always heard of people that have like the ability to just drop into a squat with no training, no excuse, nothing like that. And then there's some people who they've worked on mobility for years and years and years and just can't seem to even break parallel. There's different pelvic structures where one is going to be easier to squat, the other one's not really going to be easier to squat. But where you have the ability to squat really deep, you probably give up something else. Maybe you have less hip extension. Whereas the person who can't squat deep, they've got great hip extension. So maybe positionally and structurally, you're going to have benefits to be able to move in certain ways, but not in other ways. It's just the basic geometry of a joint. If you have bone-to-bone contact, you're not stretching through that. So that's going to be the biggest determinant of any kind of motion that you have and any range of motion you have around a joint.
Yeah. Okay, number two.
Number two, we got to look at the foot.
I better write down the numbers so I'm on the right time. Okay, we're on two now. Okay.
Yeah. Number two, you got to begin at the foot. If you're doing anything in stance and your foot is falling with the arch or you're in pronation, that's going to have a chain ripple effect all the way up. So if your foot pronates and rolls in, you're going to rotate your tibia internally, which is going to affect what happens at your knee, which is then going to affect what happens at your hip, which is then going to actually affect everything that happens all the way up the chain going up to your shoulder and your neck. So I've actually taught a couple of workshops where I had people bring their arms up over their head and then do the exact same thing, but just where they roll their feet into pronation and try to bring their arms up overhead again. And all of a sudden, everyone's movement is really drastically affected. So if you look at how the foot hits the ground, normally there should be that triplanar action where you have the tripod foot, you have the big toe, you have the baby toe, and the heel, having equal pressure distribution on those 3 points with those 3 arches, the medial lateral, medial longitudinal, and lateral longitudinal, equal balance through all those arches. That's where you're going to see the best alignment for the foot to see mobility changes. If you start pronating or rolling onto your toe or heel or all over the place, it's going to change how much mobility you have in your body.
Number 3.
This is the big one that a lot of people get stuck on. Fascial work is not stretching. When you do anything with a foam roller, you're not actually stretching a muscle. You're working on the neuroreceptive ability of that tissue to be able to produce either excitatory contraction or relaxation. So in order to stretch, you have to increase the distance between origin and insertion. So when you have that foam roller in there, it doesn't really push into the tissue enough to create a length change. So it's working more on the neural system to be able to change the tone of the muscle that's causing that contraction, which could restrict mobility. So when you're doing any fascial work, whether it's abrasion therapy, Graston, ART, foam rolling, any of that kind of stuff, unless you're taking the joints and bones and muscles through a range of motion where you increase the distance from origin to insertion, it's not stretching. It's working on the tissue quality and the neural tone, but it's not stretching.
Cool. Number 4.
Boom, you look like your mind just exploded on that one there, Rick. And you and I have talked a lot about fascia over the years, buddy. We've done a lot of fascial work going way back, I think, like 2008.
I think so. I was trying to remember that before we got on the call. Like, when was Edmonton? It was that conference in Edmonton. I'm trying to remember when. Edmonton
Even before that, Muscle Imbalances Revealed Lower Body. We did the webinar series.
Yeah,
way
but wasn't the conference in Edmonton before that?
No, that was I think 2010. We started doing webinars together around 2008.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. 2008.
It's been, like, empires have risen and fallen since we've known each other.
Wow. it's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it led to like Muscle Imbalances Revealed Lower Body and Muscle Imbalances Revealed Upper Body.
Yeah.
Spinal health and core training.
Yeah.
So it's been, and
been
2008.
crazy.
Wow.
Anyway, let's get back on topic.
Okay.
All right, number 4, breathing is a keystone to mobility. So everybody knows somebody who's just like excessively tight, that A-type personality who's go, 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 go. They're essentially jacked up into their sympathetic nervous system, and they have no ability to release or to get any kind of vagal tone going where they actually get a relaxative effect. So if you're breathing and you're always doing what's known as apical breathing, where you're just like really almost hyperventilating and breathing through your upper neck, your scalenes, and your rhomboids, you're not going to get that vagal stimulation where you can actually see a relaxative effect. So by doing deep breathing work, where you actually have your diaphragm depressed down and come back up, you can stimulate that vagal nerve, which is going to allow you to go into more of a parasympathetic nervous system state, which will allow you to relax, decrease muscle tone, which is going to allow you to actually create range of motion. So with a lot of my clients, when they're really jacked up and they're having a hard time getting range of motion, the easiest cue I can give them is breathe. Just breathe. You'll find a lot of clients when they're doing hard work and they're getting right into it and thinking about it, they stop breathing. So breathing actually allows them to just gain that range of motion, control the movement, and not gas out when they get in the middle of a set of basic stretching exercises.
Okay. Number 5.
Number 5. This is a big one that not too many people look at too easily. Limited mobility in one joint will rob mobility from another to get the job done. The body is really cool at being able to always get the job done. When you tell it to do something, it's going to do it. If it doesn't have enough mobility in one center, it's going to find it somewhere else. So a classic example of this is a deadlift. Somebody doesn't have enough hip mobility. In order to grab that bar, they have to round their lumbar spine just to get the job done. It's not one matter of, oh, I have tight hips. Well, you have tight hips because they're always trying to work to do the movement and also trying to provide stability up to your spine because you have to use that spine to get into the movement. I had a consult with a guy last night who's got incredibly tight hips. For years he had hip issues and wasn't able to see any kind of release. I had him do a couple of very basic hip isolated stretches. Nothing was going anywhere. So I had him do a couple of breathing exercises. All of a sudden he was getting more hip mobility. and he was happy with that. Then I had him stand up and try and squat. He had no ankle mobility whatsoever in any direction. So his ankle mobility was gone. And as a result, he had to donate that from his hip to be able to do any kind of squatting. So no wonder his hips were tight. They were pulling double duty anytime he tried to move. So the first thing I got him to do was go in to get some work with a manual therapist who was able to get in there and break up some old judo and basketball ankle sprain injuries to be able to get him to actually move better. All of a sudden, he has no hip pain. And it was all related back to his ankles. He was robbing mobility from his hips to pay for it from his ankles.
And it ends up bringing up a good point that, with you and many health and fitness professionals, it's kind of a team effort. There's you can help when it comes to analyzing the movements and highlighting key things when it comes to the program design and exercise selection. But teaming up with someone else, another health professional that has a certain skill, adds to it or leads to an even better result.
Absolutely. Like there's only so much that I can do in a gym setting, where somebody who's really skilled with manual therapy, they're going to have different tools, they're going to have different techniques that I don't have access to, and they'll be able to probably show benefits in 2 or 3 sessions that would take me 2 or 3 months to be able to get. So if I can get a client faster results, even if it means I refer out to somebody else for a little while, I look better in their eyes, I get them better results at the end of the day, and that's all that they care about. So if they move better and it's just like I made that right decision to send them off to somebody else, they love it. And they're going to be more willing to train with me after that because they trust me now.
Yeah, I mean, you demonstrate, expertise. You know your limitations. You refer them to someone that you trust and know and is good, and it just ends up leading to a good, client or customer experience, which just ends up leading to more work for you and you being even more busy. So I think it's unfortunate that fitness professionals kind of are different professions that they think they can do everything. It's not possible. It's better when you get a better result when it's a whole team thing.
Exactly. I'd rather be really good at what I'm really good at
Yeah,
and have somebody else come in who's good at what they do so that I don't have to try to be bad at something and fail miserably at it when I try it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Oh yeah, we'll get back on track. Number
yep.
six. Number
Number
six.
6, use the nervous system to get best results. So everyone's probably heard of PNF stretching, where you stretch a muscle into a range of motion, you provide a contraction against it, you release, and that creates bigger range of motion. So that's a stimulation of a neural receptor to be able to create that new range of motion. You can do this in a lot of different ways. You can do it in a way of where we were talking about earlier, breathing, stimulating the vagal nerve to be able to actually produce some of that parasympathetic tone where you're able to relax into a movement. You can do it by doing contract, relax methods of training where you can have that PNF style of stretch. You can also do contract, agonistic, antagonistic contraction. So you get deep into a stretch and then you pull deeper into it using your glutes. So let's say that you're doing a hip flexor stretch. You get into a position where your hip is in extension. You're trying to stretch the hip flexor. You try to contract the hip flexor briefly, produce some of that PNF stretch. Then you relax and then you contract your glute to drive back into it. Do like an agonistic, antagonistic contract where you're stimulating neural receptors to be able to actually produce that range of motion. So when you do something like that, you get a stimulation out of things like the Golgi tendon organ, the muscle spindle, which are going to produce a length tension relationship change into the muscle. And it's going to allow you to get a different result as you go forward. When we go into something like foam rolling work, that's stimulating neural receptors as well to either do like a shut-off mechanism where it overstimulates the nerve and then it produces that relaxative effect. That's why it's called self-myofascial release. Not necessarily because you're stretching, but you're releasing that neural tone that's allowing you to stretch deeper into the muscle. So when we're working on the nervous system, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but it usually results in way better change in length of the muscle than if you were to just do static stretching.
Awesome. And it really kind of highlights a good point where you can just kind of pick up a magazine or just wander around YouTube and you just see an exercise and
Yep.
you kind of do the exercise, but really there is so much more to that exercise than just doing the exercise. And someone that's kind of skilled at it has either has probably learned from their own experience, their clients, and from getting knowledge out there when it relates to all the little details in behind that basic movement, which is the basic movement is really actually complex when you look
Yep.
at all the other little things involved, the breathing and the mobility, and when to end up adding foam rolling, looking at the nervous system, looking at the foot.
Mhm. Just like Shrek said, it's like an onion. It has layers. You got to dig deep to get to the heart of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Okay, number 7.
Number 7, muscles are incredibly dumb. I've always loved the concept of people talking about muscle confusion. You ain't going to confuse a muscle. Muscles don't know what they're doing. You could take a muscle out of the body, hook it up to a car battery, and make it contract until it's dead. I mean, muscles only do what the nervous system tells them to do. And it's only going to be contract or relax. If a muscle is in a contracted state, there's a reason for it. You're not going to stretch out a contracted muscle if it's trying to guard a joint that it perceives as there being some sort of instability. So a classic example of this would be the runners who have tight hip flexors, but who are also in massive anterior pelvic tilt and lumbar lordosis. Why do you think that hip flexor is tight? It's running up the length of the anterior lumbar spine, and it's holding tight to keep that lumbar spine from exploding. It's a little bit of an over-exaggeration, but it's staying tight because it's trying to keep that spine from shifting or shearing. So it's going to stay locked on to keep that spine neutral. Until you get the person back into that neutral alignment with their spine, it's just going to stay locked on, especially if the person has a forward lean when they run. There's only one way for that spine to be stable, and that's to resist it from going into translation. That psoas has to contract and pull everything back into place. So it's one of those things where, again, it's robbing from Peter to pay Paul. It's either have the hip flexors extremely tight or have crippling low back pain.
Yeah.
You know, you can pick your poison on that aspect. But the muscle doesn't care. It's just going to contract when the nervous system says contract, and it's going to relax when the nervous system says relax. They're incredibly dumb.
And it really, I mean, that example, the hip flexor example, really shows that, if you just with a hip flexor, if all you do is just, stretch it, all you're kind of focusing in on is like the symptom.
Exactly.
That's the result. The tight hip flexor is the result. You haven't really gone back and addressed the problem. So you'll just end up, stretching your hip flexors forever,
Yeah.
as opposed to, stepping back, looking at yourself, having someone look and assess you and truly find that problem, and you fix that little problem, and then all of a sudden that symptom of the hip flexor being tight is gone. It's like magic.
And I mean, you'll find runners who have been stretching their hip flexors forever. It's like, I know a lot of distance runners. I know when you look at me, you think distance runner, but I fix distance runners more than anything. I've got a lot of people that'll come in and be like, my hip flexors are tight. Okay, well, how long? For 20 years? Oh, okay. How often do you stretch them? About 6 times a day. So you've been stretching your hip flexor for 20 years and it's not getting loose. It's obviously not the hip flexor stretch that's doing any good for you. It's like back in the day, Obi-Wan Kenobi, these aren't the droids you're looking for. You're looking in the completely wrong place. If you keep doing the exact same thing and getting no result, stop doing the exact same thing, do something different.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay, what do we got? I got my number here. Number 8. Number 8. Back
8.
on track. Number 8.
Yeah, we've already gone through a lot of these, but there's a lot of factors that can affect mobility, and the least of which is muscle length. Muscle length is something that's a relation of how many sarcomeres there are in series in a muscle, or how much range those sarcomeres are able to expand in series. It's not about how much length you have into that muscle that's going to determine whether or not you have mobility or not. The biggest way that you can see this is if you take somebody and put them under anesthesia. Well, let's say that you have somebody who's got a sore knee or whatever. They can only get so many degrees of range of motion out of that knee. You put them under a general anesthesia. They have no nerve tone going into that area whatsoever. All of a sudden, they've tripled their range of motion. It's not related to the joint. It's not related to the muscle. It's not related to anything like that. The muscle length is still the same. The origin and insertion are still exactly the same position, but putting them under anesthesia made that range of motion increase. And I don't recommend anybody going out and getting anesthesia hoping to get stretched. But when people have done surgeries to do knee replacements and they do pre-post anesthesia measurements, they can actually show that the person has full range of motion in the joint. There's just something resisting it when they have that sensation there, or they're awake and they're able to actually tolerate what's going on. So the body will protect itself in a lot of different ways. And if your body thinks that going into a range of motion is going to damage it, it's not going to let you get there.
And it brings up an interesting example. Someone in the Exercise for Injuries secret Facebook group brought up a point where she has really tight hip flexors. Going back to the hip flexors, really tight hip flexors. But when she went and had surgery on her knee,
Yeah.
After the surgery, her hip felt better than her knee, and
Yeah.
it brings up that example on why. Just everything ended up relaxing in that hip area, and she ended up losing that hip pain in that hip flexor area. But then after a couple weeks, and it ended up coming back.
Was it on the same side?
Yeah.
Yeah, she just wasn't using that hip anymore because she was limping off of the knee. So therefore, that hip didn't need to create that constant tone anymore. And as she started using that knee more, she was using it, using it, using it, and it started to just creep back in.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't change her mechanics; she just changed the structure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It goes back to number one.
There you go.
Okay, number nine.
It was number one. Number 9, the body will always adapt. If you want to see evolution on a micro scale, watch what happens when you go to the gym for a couple of weeks. Your body adapts to it. Your body will find a way to do what you're doing and get better at it. And this goes for anything in life. This goes for if you sit all day long, your body's going to adapt and make you better at sitting. You're going to get shortening of muscles in some places, lengthening of muscles in other places, stiffness, tightness, all this kind of stuff that's going to allow you to sit and maintain a position for 8, 10, 12 hours a day for as long as you need to. You're going to see degenerative changes in joints. You're going to see degenerative changes in discs that push you into that position even more. You see this a lot in trainers too. It's not just for the city population. Like, what is the normal posture that most trainers have? Gross overextension and shifting onto one hip because they stand all day. And also we train ourselves the way we would normally train our clients, which is hard extension-based exercise. So we stand all day in extension, then we train extension and posterior chain work all day long. Yeah, we're going to be jacked up into extension because our body is adapted to that. Plus, if you look at how a body walks, let's say we walk on hard surfaces all day. Most trainers tend to go into pronation if they're walking on hard surfaces all day long, just due to the fact that muscles fatigue. And they decide to say, you know what, screw you, I'm done. I'm taking my ball and going home. And as a result of that, we wind up with trainers that when they decide to go for a quick 5K run, they get IT band pain, they think their knee's exploding, everything's happening just due to the fact that that alignment is changing due to the adaptations you're doing for whatever you're going through. And I'm sure you found when you were wrestling with your kids, they would step on a couple of areas a few times, and you're like, oh, okay. And
yeah.
A couple of times at WrestleMania, they step on those areas, and you're like, oh, okay, I can deal with that a little bit easier. After the foots of fury coming flying out.
Yeah, or my youngest son is like so into superheroes, so he's got like 6 different costumes. Oh yeah, on the back, yeah, Superman. I think he might have got it from me.
And down on the floor,
he's got like the Hulk, Iron Man, Power Rangers. Yep. Oh my God, I can't even remember. There's 6 to 8 of them, and so he does this Fists of Fury. This little 4-year-old. It's quite fun, and he has no control of them, so it's more of a defensive mechanism that I do.
It's like, ah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, please don't hit me there.
Yep.
Okay, let's move on to 10. Number 10.
Number 10, the big one. Poor alignment stays with you. So going back to that hip flexor analogy, if you got tight hip flexors when you're standing, do you think you would have tight hip flexors when you're laying down?
Is that a question for me?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Why wouldn't they be?
They might be tight.
Probably would be. They were tight to begin with. They're going to be tight in a different position. And let's say that we do a movement assessment on somebody in standing, and then we do a movement assessment on them when they're laying on a table. If they were tight when they stood, immediately when they laid down, they probably would get a bit of a release work, but they'd probably still be tight. Mm-hmm. So that tight hip flexor would now push them into anterior pelvic tilt when they're laying down on a table. So when we assess somebody on a table, we're going to get different measurements because they're not in that classic neutral anatomical state. They're already kind of altered or shifted one way or another. So we can't assume neutrality when a person goes from standing to laying down or from laying down to standing up, just due to the fact that where you are is going to be affecting how everything happens up and down that chain. Now let's say we go from a table assessment to getting into the gym, and somebody decides to go through a squat or a deadlift or any kind of core exercise. If they have a tight hip flexor, using that analogy again, we saw that in standing, we saw that laying down. When they go into the gym and they go to do some weights, are they still going to have a tight hip flexor when they go to do squats? Probably. So it hasn't released itself there, and they're probably going to carry that alignment with them until something is done to address the alignment. So that's where we can get into doing like pre-activation core work. That's where we can start getting into breathing work to be able to alter the alignment of the body and be able to restore some of that balance to get that tight hip flexor to release before we start doing some of the compound lifting and actually be able to have a chance of throwing around more plates than a dishwasher at Denny's. I mean, the main goal of strength training is to be stronger. So if you're using only light weights and you're not pushing your range or you're pushing your ability to lift that weight, you're not going to be getting stronger at the rate that you could be. So if somebody comes into me and they're like, I want to get stronger and I want to get through this shoulder injury, cool. Let's get you stronger. Let's get you lifting heavy stuff, walking with heavy stuff, pushing, pulling heavy stuff, and then make sure that that shoulder doesn't hurt while you do it.
Mm-hmm.
Name of the game is strength and conditioning. So let's get people to just become absolute beasts in the gym and then become pain-free at the same time.
And that ends up that's kind of my philosophy, that you can either work around or with an injury. I mean, rest is one of the worst things you can do, and very few injuries require 100% rest.
Yeah, I always figure if you've got a sore shoulder, you've got another shoulder that's not sore, you've got two legs that aren't sore, you've got core that's not sore, you can breathe, you can do some form of conditioning work. Any of that is going to be beneficial versus just sitting on the couch and doing the remote control parade.
Yeah. I always love it when I go to the gym and I see that person that's, let's say they broke their arm or their arm's in a sling, but they're working out with the other arm. I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. Working out their legs. I'm like, that's how you do it. You don't just rest and do nothing. You've lost one wing, and while that wing's being repaired, you can work on everything else.
Yeah, and there's always ways that you can go around it. Like I have one client, he had shoulder reconstruction after he had multiple dislocations, and he wants to train his legs because he's got chicken legs. So how do you do squats when you have shoulder reconstruction? Well, we don't have a safety bar or anything like that, so I hooked up towels on a normal barbell so he can hold onto it here. And the guy's crushing back squats like nobody's business, all with his shoulder in a position where he's not going to be getting jacked up through here. Like surgically, he can't get his arm back into that position. His structure's been altered, so we just can't get there. But I can give him some towels, hook it onto the bar, and have him go like this, and he can just smash out back squats like nobody's business.
Awesome. Cool.
I'd love to
There's always ways of modifying or tweaking things so you can do them. Putting
Exactly.
joints in a safe position, even if that joint's injured.
Yeah, I'd love to get him to do front squats, but the bar on in front of his shoulder is still a little bit dicey right now. We'll probably try it in like 6 months, but this way he can load up the back squat. I've had him do 315 so far with no shoulder pain, and he's just loving it. He can just get in and get it done.
That's awesome. And
There's
it also ends up helping with the recovery of that shoulder, because you have to isometrically activate that area. It's not like it's like dropped. Everything has to isometrically activate, and that ends up helping that joint.
Exactly. You can do strength training. You can do farmer carries. They're probably one of the best shoulder rehab exercises I've ever seen. You grab weights that are equivalent to about half your body weight in each hand and just go for a little walk. See how far you go. It's grip, it's shoulder, it's posture, it's everything you could ever imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Dan John was right on that one.
yeah, taking things for taking the weights for a walk. I'm taking the weights for a walk. Okay, so we've gone through the 10. Anything else you want to leave people with? Any points, or did we kind of cover it?
Those are essentially the basics. I mean, if you think about how the body moves, you got to think about it not just being an origin and insertion. You have to think about what drives that movement, whether or not the person has that structure in place to begin with, how are they lining up to get the best geometry for the movement, and then just getting after it and training hard. I mean, there is a science to how you move, but there is also a psychology to how you move too. You got to be mentally switched on to be able to get after it. If you're always in that mindset of I'm broken, I'm injured, I can't do it, this is going to hurt, doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to do it well. You're going to always be hesitant around it. And I've seen a lot of really great research that's come out to talk about injury rehabilitation, and a person's not ready to get back onto the field until they don't hesitate to use the area.
Yeah.
So let's say we're having someone coming back off of ACL rehab or ACL reconstruction, when they're doing a box jump or a depth jump or something like that, when they hesitate to do it because they think there's that chance they're going to injure, they're not ready. They got to get their mind right before they can actually get into the game. So we got to get people to get their mind right and think, okay, even if there's pain, there's a way to get around it. There's a way to capitalize on your structure, on your mechanics, and still be able to get into it. If you can't deep squat, cool, you can box squat. You can deadlift like a champ. You can farmer carry. You can do anything else. So you don't have the ability to do one thing. I'm not joining Cirque du Soleil anytime soon, but that's not hurting my feelings.
I think the injury rate's pretty high with the contortionists.
Oh yeah. I've done some work with a couple of the guys that are the coaches, and they're like, "Yeah, this person's got back pain when they do their back bends." I'm like, "Okay, show me their back bends," and it's like,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Well, there's your problem. Why they have back pain? They're probably shearing the hell out of their spine." So
I'm getting a pain response just watching. Yeah.
exactly, and it's like, do you really think that that person is going to be able to just retire from natural causes? No, they're going to retire from an injury with something like that. That's something that you're on a ticking timeline, and you're only going to have so many of those flexion extension cycles in that extreme range of motion where you're putting your head on your butt to be able to do something like that before something gives way. So,
yeah. And it just, I mean, it just ends up, not to discourage people from doing it, but you see this with gymnasts, they end up having, a certain level of fitness and stability in order to go through those extreme ranges of motion. And as they decrease activity with time, all these, excess lax joints and injuries end up creeping up as they end up aging.
Yeah, well, that's also why most gymnasts retire by the time they're 17, because they've gotten to that point where their bones aren't as malleable anymore, and tissue creep starts happening. They start developing injuries. I mean, when you retire at 17, that's telling you something about the sport that you're involved in. I mean, when people have gone to 2 Olympics by the time they're 15, that tells you something's a little bit wonky on something like that. But hey, more power to them, because they're still being active and they're doing something that I could never even think about doing. I mean, I lift heavy stuff and throw stuff. I can't bend back to touch my butt to my head to my butt. People probably think I have one and two in the other, but Oh.
Okay, so probably should have wrapping this up. Where can people end up getting more information about you, Dean?
I've got my website, deansomerset.com. I'm a writer who's done a bunch of work with things like T-Nation, bodybuilding.com, Men's Health. You can search me out through any of those kind of features. On my website, I've also got a featured articles section where I've done different works for different organizations, so you can check that out. And also there's this new video product I'm putting out that's called Ruthless Mobility, with this weird guy from Surrey called Rick Kaselj.
Kaselj, yes. Another way of saying my last name.
There you go. How do you say your name?
It's Kaselj. Rick Kaselj. That's the English way of saying it, Kaselj. One syllable, just you see all the letters, Kaselj.
That's not one syllable. Kaselj, that's not one syllable, that's 2.
Kaselj. Okay, 2 syllables. Okay. I learned something new today. Kaselj. Okay, 2 syllables. Just say all the letters.
There you go. So I've got that new Ruthless Mobility product coming out soon, which talks more in depth about all the mobility aspects that we just talked about here today, as well as the anatomy, physiology, all that kind of stuff. So it's what I consider to be one of the most comprehensive mobility products out there, and I think you'll get a lot out of it if you get it.
Awesome. So thank you very much, Dean, for your time.
Cool. Glad to be here.
And thank you everyone for watching and listening and viewing and reading. So this is Dean Somerset and Rick Kaselj, wrapping up from Edmonton and from, Kelowna. So take care and bye-bye.